Right now, corporate politicians and corporate media have many people distracted by the actions of a former president. Donald Trump is currently facing an impeachment trial that seems to be a waste of time, considering 47 Republicans already came out and said this is unconstitutional. So for the most part, we know it's not going anywhere, but it's keeping everyone's eyes on their TV screens, on their computer screens, over an issue pertaining to a president who can't be removed from office because he's not in office anymore. And while that's going on, there are very serious questions that need to be asked about our existing current president, Joe Biden. Recently, Joe Biden's made a series of moves which leads many people to fear he may actually be compromised by China. Now, not too long ago, Mike Pompeo, he said that we have been infiltrated by China at every level. There have been a series of arrests of people at universities who are secretly taking money from China. And Joe Biden has been rescinding rules put in place by the Trump administration, which makes it easier for China to infiltrate the United States, notably as it pertains to propaganda. And even more shockingly, Joe Biden rescinded a rule that kept China out of our electrical grid. Such a strange phenomenon that even the press secretary didn't have a good answer for. Why would Joe Biden do this? So a lot of people are concerned. Is Joe Biden compromised by China? Is Chinagate a real thing? We know Russiagate wasn't, and I'm reticent to jump on any new conspiracy theory popping up about whether Joe Biden is or isn't compromised, because it did the same thing to Donald Trump. However, many people rightly point out that before Joe got elected, there was some shady dealings with his family. Notably, Joe Biden flew his son on government property, Air Force Two, to China so that his son could negotiate a private equity deal. And while that deal, as my understanding, did not go through, according to a family confidant, the Bidens still did receive millions of dollars. This confidant, his name was Bob Yalinsky, said that the Bidens were compromised. So is it possible Joe Biden is nixing these very important rules to stop Chinese infiltration because he is secretly working at their behest? Maybe, but maybe not. I know a lot of people are freaking out about this, and a lot of people definitely want to believe it, especially those who support Trump. Give somebody a reason to hate Biden, a lot of people are going to take it. It's also true that right now, the U.S. is still running training drills in the South China Sea, and China has been threatening the U.S. Also, apparently the Biden administration is saying they're not going to ease up on the trade war. So it's not so cut and dry to say that Joe Biden is actually helping China with infiltration or secretly working for them. He may just be blanket repealing Trump's executive orders for some reason. But whether it's intentional or not, it seems like they're still stupid moves that open up the door to Chinese infiltration. To put it simply, whether or not Joe Biden is trying to help them doesn't mean, is irrelevant, because his moves may actually do it. Let's take a look at what's going on. We also have a report coming out from the World Health Organization. You see, Trump pulled us out of the World Health Organization. First thing Joe Biden does, one of the first things, first day, is he brings us back in. They're claiming that the lab leak hypothesis over COVID is totally fake news. And now the media is coming after Bill Maher over this. So there's some more issues to talk about as it pertains to China and what's going on and what we should be concerned about. So let's first read how Biden has nixed a Trump-era rule combating Chinese communist-funded propaganda centers. And I'll ask, why would he do that? Well, we'll read into it, figure it out. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com and become a member to get access to exclusive podcast segments and full episodes. We've got a full episode about religion and life after death. It's an hour long. We've got segments about UFOs and alien technology and Elon Musk and Bitcoin. We set up timcast.com because it's very likely that my channels could get banned, and we want to have a place set up to where you can go. So where you can go to places in the event that happens, and we're doing members only content for you if you do sign up. So if you want to become that safety net, that shield, please go to timcast.com. But don't forget to like, share, subscribe. And if you want to support the channel, let's read the news. Campus Reform says President Donald Trump tried to enact a policy that would put pressure on American universities to reveal cooperation with China's Confucius Institute. On January 26, Biden quietly nixed the policy. A spokesperson for ICE confirmed to Campus Reform that the policy was rescinded. They say the Trump administration attempted to enact a policy that would force American universities to reveal cooperation with chapters of the Confucius Institute. President Joe Biden quietly revoked a policy a few days after his inauguration. Axios reported that in the final days of his presidency, Trump enacted a policy that would compel primary, secondary, and post-secondary institutions to disclose all contracts and transactions with the Confucius Institute. Under the policy, schools that do not report information would lose certification for the Student and Exchange Visitor Program. Records from the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs reveal that Biden nixed the policy on January 26th. A spokesperson for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement confirmed to Campus Reform that the policy was rescinded. Seth Cropsey, director of the Center for American Sea Power at the Hudson Institute, told Campus Reform that the policy could be part of the Biden administration recalibrating on Sino-American relations. However, he said hopes that the new administration is not trying to placate China. He expressed hope that the Biden administration is not trying to make overtures that make it sound as though the U.S. is unaware or uninterested in their military buildup, their aggression against neighbors, their militarization of the South China Sea, and their successful efforts to steal intellectual property. In terms of Confucius Institutes, Cropsey remarked that it is not normal practice, and for good reason, namely academic independence and freedom, to allow an outside organization to say nothing of a country that is a strategic competitor to the United States to be able to choose professors in a program within a university. Campus Reform has reported extensively on the growing influence of the Chinese government on American college campuses. In August, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo officially declared Confucius Institutes a foreign mission of the People's Republic of China. Pompeo explained that the Confucius Institute is an entity advancing Beijing's global propaganda and malign influence campaign on U.S. campuses and K-12 classrooms. The organization is funded by the PRC and part of the Chinese Communist Party's global influence and propaganda apparatus. Earlier in the Trump administration, Senator Ted Cruz added a provision to the National Defense Authorization Act that prohibited the funding of Confucius Institutes. President Trump signed the act. They go on to say Campus Reform reported that American universities accepted more than $24 million from Chinese Communist Party sources since 2015. Much of this funding was directed toward resources for schools' Confucius Institute chapters. Campus Reform reached out to the Department of Homeland Security for more information. The article will be updated accordingly. Why would he do that? It seems particularly strange to me, especially as there have been numerous stories about about professors, including Harvard professors or professor, who have been arrested essentially for spying for China. The bigger concern I have as well is that, yeah, sure, we may be running drills in the South China Sea, and that could be a threat to us. But in the end, it seems like Joe Biden may be too old for this job. Now, far be it from me to claim I know about the top secret classified, whatever documents and what's really going on. But my friends, we're entering fourth and fifth generational warfare. We're in it to a certain degree. That means information, propaganda, and manipulation is more powerful than conventional war. While the U.S. is engaging in military drills in the South China Sea, perhaps because the Biden administration is like, we want to make sure we show China we're strong, we're ignoring the fact that they are winning the war over the hearts and minds of the people. Already, corporate media is ready to attack anyone who goes after China simply because Trump did. Trump had been calling out China for a long time. And if you start talking about it, the media will say you're far right and a liar. And we have that story in this piece from the Daily Beast about Bill Maher. Bill Maher pushes Steve Bannon Wuhan lab COVID conspiracy. Now, this is from just over a week ago, and it's the weirdest thing. You see, Bill Maher hosted Brett Weinstein and Heather Heying, where they talked about what's called the lab leak hypothesis. Something that many people have actually given credence to, notably the Washington Post and the Daily Mail and many other prominent news outlets, whether you like them or not. I know I said those two because the left likes WAPO and accuses Daily Mail of being conservative or tabloid or whatever. So I'll give you both. How about that? They've both entertained the possibility. I am not here to say it's true or false. I'm here to point out that when Bill Maher simply talked about it with Brett Weinstein and Heather Heying, who are academics, the media smeared them and played it up like they're pushing this anti-China conspiracy pushed by Steve Bannon, when in fact they were just referring to probably Donald Trump. But that's the craziest thing. If you ask a simple logical question, could COVID have accidentally been released from a lab? Not to say it was man-made, just that lab leak hypothesis. They accuse you of being anti-China and pro-Trump. That's the narrative. Well, we will read into this. But before we do, I want to show you this story from the Washington Examiner about what Biden is actually doing beyond the propaganda. This is from the Examiner, and they report from January 27th. Biden's order could let China control U.S. electrical grid. What? Why? Why would you do that? Quinn Hillier writes, less than 1 week into his presidency, Joe Biden has already put U.S. security at greater risk to Chinese and other threats. Biden, who long has been accused by critics of being soft on China, issued a lengthy executive order in which, buried amid matters purportedly designed to combat climate change, was an anomalous and potentially dangerous provision. The provision in question addresses nothing reasonably connected to climate change. Instead, it suspends for 90 days a key security measure put in place last May by former President Trump. Biden's suspension of Trump's measure makes not the slightest sense. Trump's executive order 13920 declared a national emergency with respect to the nation's electric grid and prohibited the acquisition or installation of any bulk power electrical equipment designed, developed, manufactured, or supplied by persons owned by, controlled by, or subject to the jurisdiction or direction of a foreign adversary. In sum, Trump forbade the use of grid equipment that is made in China, Russia, or other hostile nations. Trump's order was a common sense response to real proven threats. Just last year, the Wall Street Journal reported that the United States seized a Chinese-built transformer because officials believe, quote, its electronics had been secretly given malicious capabilities, possibly allowing a distant adversary to monitor or even disable it on command. Cybersecurity expert Joseph Weiss reported that officials found electronics that should not have been part of the transformer, hardware backdoors that could allow the Chinese to effectively gain control of the transformers without any network forensics being the wiser. We'll read more into this. Joe Biden suspended this rule, and that's kind of crazy. There was this big story not that long ago, several years ago, to be honest, where there were concerns about whether the U.S. military should be using products that were made in China. The fear was that you'd buy a toaster from China and there would be a secret Bluetooth or Wi-Fi antenna in it, and it would be infiltrating and stealing your data, hacking your internet, and then sending that data back to China. Now, I actually covered this story quite extensively and reached out to many cybersecurity experts at the time. Some told me there was a very real fear and they could very easily do it. So we should be very careful about what we get made in China. You get a computer made in China, they probably will put something on it. Why not? But many told me it was just an excuse to buy American made goods. It was an excuse. It was a boogeyman so that people would be scared of China. And in reality, all these different companies, probably not happening. Now, in my personal opinion, I think it probably is. I've heard conflicting reports from different security experts, but it would make sense. Everything in China is for the Communist Party. It doesn't matter what your company is. You can make whatever you want. If they know computers or anything is being sent here, they'll probably start tampering with them. Why wouldn't they? They'll get direct access to our computers. So, of course. So this is very strange. We're reading that they actually found hardware backdoors in transformers. So Trump said we should put a stop to this. Think about it. It was Rachel Maddow talking about Russiagate years ago, where she told us that in Fargo, in the middle of winter, Russia could shut down the electrical grid, maybe. And it was considered to be unhinged. I heavily criticized her for it. And I understand that industrial control systems can be hacked and it can happen. It's just crazy. You're talking about an act of war. And it was in an effort to smear Trump as some kind of agent of Russia. Now, I'm not going to sit here and claim that Chinagate is real. I just showed you, Joe Biden is running drills in the South China Sea. That is a provocation, to say the least. I think at the very least, though, Biden just doesn't know what he's doing or doesn't care. And this definitely seems like a major vulnerability. The Examiner goes on to say, Weiss also reminds us that China was first caught trying to hack into a U.S. grid in California as far back as 2001. That the Russians have been in our U.S. grid since 2014. So I'll give a shout out to Rachel Maddow on that one. Sure. I'm not one to claim I think China would disrupt our electrical grid or shut it down, but it is possible. We've seen many internet outages, and let me explain some very basic principle to you in fourth and fifth generational warfare. There have been many instances where people will go to a website called Down Detector, and you can see a map, a heat map showing all of where our internet has gone down in certain circumstances. Often, you'll see this map of the U.S. with red spots all up and down the eastern seaboard. That's where the internet is no longer working. Think about what that means. Now, China could drop a bomb on a city and wipe out a bunch of factories and cripple us economically. Or they can just slow us down by shutting down our lines of communication. Cyber war is happening. It's been happening for a long time. It's legit. Like China, Russia, the US, India, Brazil, attacks are happening all day, every day. If China, Russia, Iran, or any other country implemented a cyber attack which disabled our internet at a massive level, and it's simple to do if they go after Google's DNS servers, then our economy grinds to a halt. Not completely, but it slows down substantially. And the race is on. These countries want to grow faster and bigger than us. China's economy is going to eclipse the U.S. very soon, I believe in the next 10 years. They can speed that process up by slowing us down. To put it simply, if we're all racing towards some kind of economic superpower or militaristic superpower position, we can all see the finish line. China disrupting our communication is them throwing a wrench into the spokes of our bike as we're riding, and then we get stopped. They pass us by, we pull the wrench out, we start riding again. That's why it's very concerning to see Joe Biden doing things like this. They go on to say, remote computer access may not be the only problem. In an interview with me Tuesday afternoon, Tommy Waller, director of infrastructure security at the Center for Security Policy and the director of an expert coalition called Secure the Grid, said that the concerns extended beyond remote computer control. Quote, we're also worried about sensors and actuators and drives that are installed even if they are not connected to the internet. If that hardware installed inside of them is designed at some point to send the wrong readings, it could sabotage the safety and security of that system. It has long been thought, quoting just one illustrative major paper on the subject, that a major power grid collapse might be the single most deadly event in U.S. history, with catastrophic results due to the lack of basic elements necessary to sustain life in dense urban and suburban communities. It thus makes perfect sense for Trump to have issued the directive against involving hostile foreign entities in the grid supply chain. Contrarily, it boggles the mind to see Biden suspend Trump's directive. Granted, Biden's order suspends it only for 90 days while asking the Secretary of Energy to use the time to consider if a replacement order should be issued. Still, even if the policy is to be reviewed for improvements, why suspend it in the meantime? Why leave the grid vulnerable? Why not keep Trump's wise executive order 13920 in place until and unless the Biden team comes up with something better? Why open the floodgates to grid infrastructure produced by countries hostile to America? Why indeed? Biden's order offers no explanation for suspending Trump's prescription. This part of Biden's new executive order is not just foolhardy, but reckless. Congress should raise a stink about it, and Biden should revoke it forthwith. I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I can tell you, as I've already stated, that the U.S. is doing these drills, that Joe Biden won't be shutting down this trade war. Trust CNN or not, we do have this article from Politico. Biden's biggest clean energy partner, China. While they say Biden is only seeking to have this reviewed, why suspend it indeed? Could it be that Joe Biden is actually seeking to open up the country to Chinese energy programs? Perhaps. I mean, Politico says that Biden's biggest clean energy partner is going to be China. And forgive me if I don't believe it, because China is a massive polluter. I mean, the smog is so bad in China. You see these photos where they have this big TV screen that shows the sunrise because people can't see the sunrise because they're breathing in all this smog and it's everywhere. So I'm not necessarily convinced I believe it. Look, I like the idea that we bring China into the fold. We work towards a better future and we curtail this pollution and we prevent war. But so far, all of these efforts seem to do one thing: benefit China and hurt the U.S. Whatever this plan is to maybe normalize China's, economy and politics, it didn't work. The idea was that if we bolster our trade lines with China, sending a lot of our industry over there, they'll have no choice but to become more like us, when in fact, they just took advantage of us. And it gets worse every day. Maybe Joe Biden doesn't want to see this country fall to the hands of China. I'm not entirely convinced. On the IRL podcast, we had on China Uncensored, two hosts from a YouTube channel, where they mentioned that one of the people Joe Biden brought in has repeatedly praised China, especially in some controversial areas. So it is extremely disconcerting. Absolutely is. It's extremely disconcerting to see how the media actually talks about what's going on with any criticism of China. Let me show you the story about Bill Maher, Steve Bannon, and the Wuhan lab. For the Daily Beast, they write, back in April, Bill Maher went on a hysterical rant against China over the novel coronavirus. The real-time host insisted that COVID-19 be called the Chinese virus because it originated in China, citing the Spanish flu as precedent, which did not come from Spain, unbeknownst to Maher. Railed against the PC police for refusing to let him and others call it the Chinese virus. And even though hate crimes against Asian Americans had risen 100 cases a day at the time, and compared China's wet markets, where he said the virus originated, to nuclear bombs. They say, well, in tonight's edition of his HBO show, Maher welcomed a pair of podcast hosts, the husband and wife duo of Bret Weinstein and Heather Heying, to discuss the origins of COVID-19. Weinstein and Heying, for the uninitiated, are members of the so-called intellectual dark web, who in 2017 both resigned from their posts as biology professors at Evergreen State in protest of a Minority Appreciation Day, that's not true, and have since whined about campus speech and a number of libertarian-leaning podcasts. They were forced to resign, I believe, and it was over a demand that white people be excluded from the university. And Bret Weinstein said that's discriminatory and it's going to make things worse. It ultimately led to their ouster. I do not believe they were happy to have been forced out of the university. Get your facts right, Daily Beast. Maher proceeded to forward the conspiracy theory that COVID-19 was man-made and somehow escaped from a lab in Wuhan. Quote, we've heard a lot recently about the fact that maybe the virus did start in a lab, offered Maher. Let's talk about that. The fact that there is this lab, I think it's the only one in the world quite like it, in Wuhan where it started. It would almost be a conspiracy theory to think it didn't start in a lab, right? And that theory was demonized at first. Oh, come on, that's a conspiracy thinking. That started in a lab, but certainly a 50-50. Would you say that? Quote, oh, it's far more likely than that, replied Weinstein, adding, it looked to be about 90% probability that it originated in a lab. We are so politicized and polarized and partisan now as a country that if the wrong guy proposes to begin with, and for half the country it was the wrong guy, then the rest of the country says, no way, no how. We're going to call that a conspiracy theory. He goes on to say, let's unpack this a bit. The wrong guy Heying is referring to is likely alt-right gadfly Steve Bannon. That's not true. Heather said, for half the country, it was the wrong guy. She's clearly referring to Donald Trump. Here's what I want to point out. Bill Maher can have his opinions. Bret and Heather can have their opinions. I don't know whether this came from a lab or whatever. I know it's been in the media quite a bit. But what's with the weird animosity, anger towards Bill Maher over his rant against China? Isn't that weird? I certainly think so. I'm not necessarily trying to imply anything, but I do find it very strange that when you criticize China, people in media come out of the woodwork and start, well, getting mad at you. And now we have this story. First, I'll point out this. Biden restores ties to the World Health Organization that were cut by Trump. One of the first things he did once he was inaugurated. The World Health Organization whitewash. Investigators back Beijing's claim COVID did not leak from a Wuhan lab and call for no further study into that theory. But they will probe China's claim virus was imported on frozen meat. Well, China's been trying to essentially deflect and say that it wasn't necessarily the wet market. Maybe it was frozen meat. In fact, China has even blamed other countries, saying maybe it came from there. You know what? It's all propaganda. And to be honest, maybe we won't know for sure. But there are important questions that need to be brought up about what the Biden administration is doing with China, the rules that are being relaxed, and why we can't have an honest conversation about a general idea. In the video, in the segment with Bill Maher, they mentioned, Bret and Heather mentioned something interesting about a simple hypothesis. When Bret mentioned that it was a 90% probability, what he was saying is certainly this is a hypothesis that requires testing. But almost immediately, everyone attacked anyone who brought it up. I'll tell you the funniest part. When the lab leak hypothesis first emerged, I saw it in the Washington Post, and I was actually surprised. I did a segment on it where I was like, wow, the Washington Post is actually entertaining this idea. And I always take a rather lukewarm stance saying, I'm not saying it's true. I'm actually critical of the Washington Post for entertaining something they can't prove without evidence. But sure enough, out of the woodwork comes the tribal establishment left saying Tim Pool is pushing this fringe conspiracy theory. Because what does pushing really mean? That's the game they play. Simply by me mentioning the article in a critical fashion, they'll claim I still pushed the idea that it existed. That to me was weird, that I could read mainstream media and it would trigger the establishment in such a way that now those who, mainstream media outlets rarely bring it up. To be fair, however, New York, I believe it was New Yorker, ran an article about the lab leak hypothesis. There are a lot of questions that need to be asked in regards to China's involvement in what happened. Because even if you don't believe the lab leak hypothesis, and I'm not saying you should, it's a hypothesis, doesn't mean it's fact or anything like that. China does have a lot of responsibility because we know they lied. They lied to the World Health Organization and in turn to the world. They were buying up special protective equipment around the world. They instructed citizens in foreign countries to buy PPE, personal protective equipment, and send it back to China. They knew they had a problem. And they lied. They absolutely lied. There are some very interesting questions that are brought up, notably that Brett Weinstein mentions gain-of-function research. In the article, they want to mention, quote, these two features of the virus, the mutations of the spike protein and its distinct backbone, rules out laboratory manipulation as a potential origin for SARS-CoV-2, explained Christian Anderson, an associate professor of immunology and microbiology at Scripps Research, who authored a paper debunking the Bannon theory. What I wanted to point out is that, well, I'll leave that hypothesis there, but I will point out Brett Weinstein mentions gain-of-function research, that there is this laboratory where they've effectively tried to maximize the damage a virus can cause. Gain-of-function research is essentially they want the virus to gain certain functions. And there are a lot of legitimate questions that exist in the mainstream. I want to show you this article from Newsweek. I have definitely covered this and mentioned this before, but let's show it. This is Newsweek.com, far from a conservative outlet, and they said, Dr. Fauci backed controversial Wuhan lab with U.S. dollars for risky coronavirus research. They say Fauci, an advisor to Trump, this is back in April, mind you, is an advisor to Trump and something of an American folk hero. They say, but just last year, the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, the organization led by Fauci, funded scientists at the Wuhan Institute of Virology and other institutions to work on gain-of-function research on bat coronavirus. In 2019, with the backing of NIAID, the National Institutes of Health committed $3.7 million over 6 years for research that included some gain-of-function work. The program followed another $3.7 million, 5-year project for collecting and studying bat coronaviruses, which ended in 2019, bringing the total to $7.4 million. There's some very serious questions that need to be asked about this. If people really believe it came from a lab, and Dr. Fauci used U.S. dollars to fund much of this research on bat coronaviruses, the implications are horrifying. That's why I'm honestly not entirely convinced it's true. Let me just be real. The idea that Dr. Fauci funded this lab, did research on the exact virus, which is now wreaking havoc and it leaked, is, I don't know, movie-esque. But at the same time, it's actually rather simple. Dr. Fauci and, the Wuhan lab were doing research on bat coronaviruses, making a deadly virus, not the deadliest, and then someone accidentally leaked it. I suppose the hypothesis is that they were doing research on the virus to potentially put together a vaccine in the event there was an outbreak. And then somebody got infected somehow, left, and then other people got infected. Many people have talked about this theory because the wet market they claimed it emerged from is very, very close to, I believe it's Wuhan's version of the CDC. I don't know if that's the exact lab where the research was being done, but it certainly is one heck of a coincidence that Dr. Fauci was involved in this gain-of-function research. At the very least, I think it's a hypothesis worthy of bringing up simply because the pieces are all there. It doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean we go nuts. It means we just follow the evidence. We ask certain questions. And if the evidence points to a conclusion, then we roll with that conclusion. But in the end, you can't bring it up without being criticized for being, anti-China. And China loves playing this game. They know our weaknesses and they exploit them, which is why the first story I brought up today is so, alarming. Biden quietly nixes Trump-era rule combating Chinese communist-funded propaganda centers. That I find to be very strange. I just find it to be very strange, to be completely honest. They're going to exploit our weaknesses. They're going to push, that Americans are racist against the Chinese, against China. They're going to claim that Trump is bad and all of these things, and they're going to need to use manipulation in order to get it done. Why would Biden be nixing these rules instead of just putting them under review and waiting? It's like they said in the Washington Examiner article. If there's a real concern about Trump's plans, well then, hold on, Let's review them. And then if they're bad, we'll get rid of them or replace them. But in the meantime, why do this? I don't know. I suppose at a partisan level, people on the right think that Joe Biden is absolutely compromised, and I think he is. But whether he's compromised in terms of his family profited from China or he's secretly working for them are very, very different things. That I'm not saying. I'm just saying his family made money off China, so I question whether or not he's got, debts to pay. But I suppose we can only wait and see. I think we should be a little bit chill. I mean, the U.S. is still doing these drills. That's very important, mind you. And Joe Biden isn't going to end this trade war, which Trump started, so it's not absolute. But something I think we should be paying much more attention to than this impeachment. I'll leave it there. Next segment will be tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. We will be live. Thanks for hanging out, and we will see you all then.